The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 107.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Thank you for joining us today on the EL. We have Sander Biehn, author of The 30-Year Paycheck, Destruction and Redemption in Corporate America. Welcome, Sander, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thanks, Wade. Thanks for having me here.
Will you take just a moment before we take a deep dive into your book and introduce yourself? Tell us just a little bit about you personally.
Yeah, my name is Sander Biehn, and I've worked for about 20 plus years for a very large telecommunication firm in sales. So I've always been in sales since I got out of college and almost up to the present. And then about a year and a half ago, I left the company and decided to start my own business in social selling for business-to-business sellers. So basically talking about what my career had been about and sort of framing in to talk about how social media works in that construct. So in the process of doing this, I also wrote a book, and that's what the purpose of our conversation is today.
Perfect. And thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into that book that you were just talking about, The 30-Year Paycheck, which was just made available for purchase back in May of 2014. And Sander, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to cover the top questions that our listener/reader would like to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing The 30-Year Paycheck?
So the inspiration for me writing the book really came down to a couple things. First of all, I was doing a bunch of traveling as a salesperson, and I was hearing a lot of the same types of things that people complaining about things with their work when I was on the road that people were complaining about in my office. So for example, I was, people would talk about, man, this boss is really hard and a difficult person to work with and doesn't really listen to my ideas and doesn't help me, progress in my career. And that's something that I was hearing as well in my office, as well as hearing that in airport lounges, hotel lobbies, anywhere I went. I started hearing like a lot of the same sorts of complaints about the working world everywhere I went. And so I started thinking to myself, geez, I think I've got some answers to this over time. And I thought it would be an interesting topic for people to read about. And the other thing that sort of inspired me, and we'll talk about this in the deep dive more, is that I wanted to write a different kind of business book. So many business books are out there that it's sort of a prescriptive 1, 2, 3, 6 things you can do here, 7 things you can do there. And not that I don't give advice in my book, but I wanted to make my book overall a good read. And I felt that that was missing in the world. I thought that there were too many business books that were too prescriptive about things, and there wasn't enough story in it. And so I put my book in a narrative format so that people could really approach it and read it like they would a piece of fiction, but learn something from a business perspective.
So you already started to attack our second question, which is really a way of differentiating your book. And maybe you can go into greater depth. But the question is, what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, I think the main thing is how the book is constructed. So the book is constructed in a narrative. So it's a loosely fictionalized narrative of things that have happened in my career and what I saw in 20 years of working for a really large company and then finally finding my way to break away from that company and start my own business, take my own ideas and turn them into money for myself. And so that's the one thing that differentiates it, is that it's written in a narrative format. So it sort of talks about it from a story perspective, and it kind of goes from beginning to end. It sort of talks about like what was going on from a college perspective in my mind and how I decided that I was going to get involved in sales. And then it kind of goes from there and how the career shapes up and goes through, 20 plus years a career in sales. And the second thing I think that's a little bit different about it is, the advice that you see in the book is really, and the wisdom that you find in the book is really in between the lines a little bit. So you kind of watch this character as this character goes through a career, and you kind of learn from the mistakes that this character makes, and you see the character change, and see the character sort of realize a path forward. And I think that's a very powerful way for people to learn, is to sort of be there. Because, I talk about like hands-on from a learning perspective. I think there's a lot of great books out there, but sometimes the wisdom comes out, hits you in the face you try to grab it, and then you quickly forget what it is because it's not in the format of a story. And so I think that's what makes my book a little bit different.
So, Sander, we're now to my favorite part of the entire interview, and that's where I'm going to ask you to take a deep dive into the content itself. Will you take the next 5 to 10 minutes and really tell us what your book's all about?
Yeah, so as like I said, I keep mentioning that it's a book that was written in a narrative format, and the book basically starts out with a young person who's in college, and I think that there's a lot of millennials that are feeling this today, and they're not sure what they want to do. In my book, the character is graduating with a degree in classical studies and philosophy, so it doesn't really have a lot of meaningful path forward as to like what you do with that when you get out of school. And this character kind of falls into a career in sales because, as many of us know who've been in sales for a while, that really the only thing you need coming out of college to be a salesperson is reliable transportation. And so that's kind of how this character falls into this job in sales. And then, it's never the character's idea to stay with that forever, but it sort of just seems like a way to be safe, a way to start paying off college loans, a way to move out of the house, a way to be independent and be on their own. And then the question is, why does that character stay in this position that probably is not something that was a dream job for them ever anyway? And a number of things happen, and I think that people will resonate with this because it sort of talks about the years where you get married, the years where you have children, and especially from a guy perspective, if you think about it this way, many males feel that they need to be breadwinners. And I think that often keeps people away from, going out and doing something that they really want to do from an entrepreneurial perspective, or to be out on their own. They stick with what is safe. But the weird thing that happens kind of along the line, and this happens with the character as well, is, as you sit there and you try to remain safe and you're concentrating on what safety is all about, you start to lose a little bit of that edge, the innovation that's in your heart, the ideas that you have. You start to bury a little bit of who you are. And that happens to this character as he moves through his career. He starts burying really the way he sees the world and starts to try to adopt seeing the world in the way that he thinks his superiors want him to act, and things that his superiors want him to do. And, in the end, that doesn't serve him very well. In the end, it actually limits his career inside this large company. And the interesting thing that happens towards the end, or the third part of the book, is the character decides, hey, I'm going to kind of go back to my roots and do things my own way. And, this guy finds out, and we talk a lot about why this is the case in the book, but that, large organizations really aren't necessarily suited for people kind of marching to the beat of their own drum. And so some, people that have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, there are ways that they can innovate inside of an organization. And I talk in the book about a number of things that organizations, need to do and are slowly doing to kind of evolve and change. But it kind of concentrates on what we as individuals need to do to bring us back to our roots. And in this case, this individual decides that he needs to move on and create his own business, do his own thing. And that's kind of what happens in the book. And it sort of wraps up with the character moving into an entrepreneurial position. But I think what's really important about this is it kind of talks about the evolution and what happens to most people as they fall into a career. Because let's face it, very few of us end up actually going after what we really want to do straight out of college and doing it. We're all sort of trying to wonder, like, okay, how do I fit into this world? Like, what is it I need to do? And, and what I talk about in the book and what I really try to nail home with the narrative is that really the best thing that we can do to be not only successful, but also, in the end, happy, is to sort of follow who we are and what it is that excites us, what it is that we're necessarily good at, and to kind of go after that at all costs. Because by not doing those things, we sort of start limiting ourselves, and eventually it starts taking away from a piece of who we really are and enabling us to be the best that we can be.
So, Sander, I think you already answered this next question, or I believe I might know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that's, we're going to take a moment. First of all, great job summarizing. But if the reader can only get one concept, principle, or action at him, out of your entire book, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, and I think it's there is one, and I think it is that no matter who you are or what it is that you know how to do, or how people have made you feel up until this point in your life, that really you have the gifts to be enough, to not only be enough, but to be superior at who you are. And we look around at people who've made it big, and you look at entrepreneurs, or you look at people at the top of corporations, and you wonder, geez, am I good enough to be those people? And the answer is clearly yes. And the reason that, in my opinion, those people succeed and other people maybe feel stifled in their career is because they're not really living out who they are. So I don't believe that every job is right for every person. I don't think it's in the heart of every person to be the CEO of a Fortune 50 or to be, the creator of a $50 million, a year business. But I do think that it's in the heart of every single person to be something amazing and to do something absolutely spectacular with their lives and with their career. And it's just a matter of tapping into that. The first principle, and I think the most important one, is to know and have the confidence up front that you are good enough, that you're enough for the world. And I tell myself that all the time when I go in front of my clients now. And it's a very, very powerful concept.
Do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to paraphrase. At one point, the character says that, and it sees this, and I see this a lot in corporate America. I see this in sometimes with the corporations that I work with now, is that everybody is trying to act like their boss in order to be promoted. And so, I talk about, people being just a cheap knockoff of who their boss is, and how destructive that can be. So it's like, mentioning like, really when because I talk about this in the first person, I say something to the effect of, I was trying to act like my boss, but really I was just a cheap knockoff of who my boss was. And I was totally forgetting who I was. And that speaks to the concept I just spoke about a moment ago. It can be really destructive in a career.
And it wouldn't be a book-aholic podcast if we didn't ask you this last question. And that's, what's a book that you've read that's been a game changer, a paradigm-shifting, life-impacting book? And will you share it with our audience?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Ernest Hemingway. And I know it sounds weird because it's kind of old and it's fiction and all these things. People say it's overly macho and all the rest of it. But I talk about For Whom the Bell Tolls in the in my book a lot. I talk about, I have a chapter mentioning when I'm carrying that book with me, about to be laid off. And I will just tell you that I think Hemingway's fantastic because Hemingway reminds us all that we need to live, and we need to live not necessarily in a dangerous way, but in a way that we're truly aware and we're really experiencing what this life has to give. Because I think, Hemingway at the first and foremost with a lot of the stuff that he talks about, he keeps that sense of mortality, that existential being like straight in front of us. And I know that it's probably not your normal answer to get someone telling you that, hey, read a book by Hemingway. But I think that it's important. Certain fiction is super important to help us understand how we need to live a little bit. And I think that, diving into, because I'm a big business book reader, don't get me wrong. I read, I've just finished 0 to 1. I've read tons and tons of business books, especially in the social media world. But I think it's also important for us to realize who we are a little bit and to keep our eyes wide open in a world and knowing that, hey, we're going to be here for a finite period of time. And it's time for us to experience. It's time for us to touch other people. And it's a time for us to really, be alive while we're living.
I'm glad you did recommend what you recommended because that question's not meant to be. And sometimes I preface it as, hey, listen, this does not have to be a business book. Because I don't want to set those parameters because there are a lot of phenomenal books that would not be classified as business or just entrepreneurship. But there's great things that you can get out of them. You know?
I would say every entrepreneur should read Hemingway.
Excellent. Well, very good. Well, Sander, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also your book, The 30-Year Paycheck?
Yeah, the 30-Year Paycheck is available on Amazon. It's probably the best way to find it. You can find more information on me and on the book by going to my website, which is www.thought-horizon.com. So it's Thought Horizon is the name of my company, loosely named after the event horizon, which is a principle in Einstein's physics of the universe. So that's how you find me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sander, is this your first book, did you say?
It is my first book, and I'm actually beginning to work on a second, so hopefully be back here to talk to you more and talk to your listeners about another great book at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Is there any kind of teaser you can give us as far as what it's about? Tiny teaser, maybe?
Well, yeah, I'm writing a bit more of a memoir about being this. I grew up. My father was a judge, and I'm going to write about men, now men who were sons of judges, and what that means to grow up in the shadow of somebody who's got all the authority in the world, and what that does to you from your psyche perspective.
Oh wow, that'll be a powerful book.
I'll let you know when it's out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for coming on today and sharing your book with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Wade. It's great to be here.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you would like the opportunity to win this book by Sander, The 30-Year Paycheck, just visit the elpodcast.com and become a VIP. It's a button at the upper right-hand corner. And if you'd like more information on Sander or his book, The 30-Year Paycheck, you can check out the EL podcast as well for the show notes.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.